I'm delighted now to introduce you to Richard Lewis, who many of you knew in any event as one of Ireland's most renowned designers. And Richard then did something else as well. He went on Marion's programme and spoke incredibly movingly and beautifully about his love for his partner Jim and Jim's death and what that meant. And it was something I think that touched anyone who heard it, and we put it up on our website, a link to it. And it was just one of those moments that are somehow magical and moving at the same time, and human. And I think not alone did it move us and touch us, it also contributed hugely to a wider understanding of lesbian and gay lives and loves and relationships. And we're very grateful to you, Richard, for that. So, Richard Lewis, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening, everybody. There are a couple of people I know here who know that public speaking is not my thing. I've done it twice before because it was important, and tonight I figure it's important. Hence the notes. Brian Sheehan phoned me from Glen to know would I help out launching this pamphlet, and he mentioned the Hospice Foundation, and let's face it, yes, of course. It must be the most respected and loved institution in Ireland for the wonderful work they do. And of course, Marion was involved as well, and you know, she's a great lady. Brian sent me all the bumf and brochure on Glen, which I have to say I knew nothing about. And this posh invitation, beautifully printed, in the Royal Irish Academy, for this little leaflet, and it seemed, for such a small thing, it seemed a big thing until I read it. And I don't know who wrote it, but I've never been more moved. It was so caring, sympathetic, and yet practical. It just pushed all of the right buttons. And my partner died, as you know, 3 years ago, and I was given lots of pamphlets and books. There was one particular book that was the trendy book at the time for bereavement, and I got 3 copies of it from friends. But nothing came near this. I don't know who wrote it. But when I read it, my first reaction was, it was a beautiful piece. It could apply to anybody, gay or straight, young or old. But when I looked closely, there were differences. If a husband or a wife dies, this is tragic. And if there are children, of course, it's worse. If a gay partner dies, that's tragic as well. I think people perhaps don't realize that. I closed on about 500 letters. This sounds unbelievable. When Jim died, wonderful, caring letters. Not one negative, but once every so often, one letter would stand out. And the one I'm going to tell you about is very extreme, but it's to make a point. I got a letter from a man. I don't know his age. I would suspect middle to late middle age. He was in a long-term relationship with a man. How long-term it was, I don't know. He lived in a rural village, and his partner died. Nobody in the village knew they were having a relationship. He was at the funeral, and he stayed at the back of the church, not because he was put there. He was afraid to go up near the congregation, because if he got upset, people might realize. That's very extreme, but I got so many letters that were similar. We've all spoken about the legal end of things, and one of the things, next of kin, is tremendously important. And I'll probably say it a number of times, I was incredibly lucky. Jim died. he dropped dead in the street. The guards came to me at 8:10 in the morning. The guards were unbelievable. They looked after me for the morning. They totally accepted my relationship. I was sitting in the living room with the guard talking to me, and the other guard was out in the kitchen making me a cup of tea. They were unbelievable. They gave me their mobile numbers. They were with me for the morning, and they waited until friends of mine collected me from the hospital, and they stayed around until people arrived to collect me. The hospital were exactly the same. Once I said I was Jim's partner, I was considered next of kin. And again, I'm one of the lucky ones. Jim's family were exactly the same, and whatever happened at the funeral was my decision, because I knew what I wanted, and I knew what Jim would have wanted. But it's not the same for everyone. I've heard, well, it was mentioned earlier that people being excluded from funerals, from hospitals. The inheritance, I was lucky that we had bought our house in the correct way, and we had left wills, and provided I live in the house for 6 years, I don't have to pay tax on it. But if I had, it was a house that we bought for 73,000. At the time Jim died, it was worth 1.1 million. I would have had to pay tax on that. Everything Jim left me, I had to pay tax on. I was allowed 20,000. Anything in our joint names, I had to pay tax on half it. My business had to be valued, and I had to pay tax on half the value of my business. Again, I keep saying I'm lucky. I could pay it. But there are people who can't. And dependent on what money was left, I was lucky I wasn't. But the law is changing, I hope. I think with the work Glenn is doing, I think that will help tremendously. But I think the important thing tonight is the Hospice Foundation, I think, must be one of the most respected, loved, and revered institutions. And the fact that they have reached out their hand to gay people will make a tremendous difference. Now, I've no experience of terminal illness, but it must be dreadful. I have experience of sudden death. Yes, it's terrible. But to know that the hospice is there and that we're not excluded is incredibly important, and society will see this and help. I think the movement the hospital have made towards gay people will make other people realise that we're no different to anybody else. People will think of us as normal because we are normal, and that will make a tremendous difference. And the only last thing I'll say is, if you've lost somebody, and if you haven't now, maybe someday you will, the only thing I'll say to you is, don't let anybody tell you how to grieve. It's your grief. Grieve in your own way and in your own time.